American Giant makes great clothing, sweatshirts, jeans, and more right here in the U.S. Visit American-Giant.com and get 20% off your first order with code STAPLE20. That's 20% off your first order at American-Giant.com, code STAPLE20.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Case Uncovered, where we uncover the untold stories behind some of the most compelling true crime cases. I'm Jen Rivera, and I'm looking forward to bringing you new bi-weekly episodes moving forward. Thank you all for being patient with me. As you may know, I'm one of the co-founders of Fire Eyes Media, and we have a ton of new projects happening. Jules, my business partner, and I have also started a brand new season of True Crime and Headlines with Jules and Jen, and you can catch me there every week on Tuesdays and Fridays, wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm also going to be attending Advocacy Con in Indianapolis, Indiana here in the next few weeks. I'll have a booth and will also be speaking at the event. I'm really looking forward to meeting some of you, as well as some of the amazing families I've had the pleasure of working with. So make sure you come and say hi if you're attending. Today, I have a very special episode for you. We're revisiting a case that has haunted a family for nearly 2 decades. And that's the case of Eric Nelams, a U.S. Army veteran, a devoted father, and a loving husband who was gunned down outside his home in Phoenix City, Alabama. I've had the privilege of working with Eric's sister Kathy for this episode and got to talk with Kathy, her mom, and her children. They were kind enough to share more about Eric and his case, and I'll be including clips of our conversation throughout this episode. September 26th, 2003 started out just like any other day. But it ended in murder. Eric's family and friends never saw it coming. And 20 years later, they are still left with one haunting question. Who killed Eric Nelams? And why? Eric Bernard Nelams was born in 1971 in Columbus, Georgia, to Annie and Ernest Nelams. Growing up in a large, close-knit family, Eric was known for his big heart and even bigger presence. His sister Kathy describes him as small in stature but big in spirit. Eric was a natural athlete, excelling in baseball despite his smaller frame. Kathy shares when Eric played baseball, he hit the ball out of the park. People would underestimate him, but he always rose to the occasion. And that really was the essence of who he was. Eric was much more than an athlete, though. He was the glue that held his family and friends together. He had a special way of making people laugh and feel welcomed.
My brother and I are the only children that my mom has. I'm the oldest and he was the youngest. We were so close in age, like a year and a half, but it feels like it's a year. If I was in the first grade, he was in kindergarten. So we literally did life together. And he was a very nice person. I just don't say that because he's my brother. If he was something other than that, I'd be very transparent and say that. But he was very kind. He was silly and jovial. Whenever he would come around, he would light up a room and just, if you're having a bad day, he's going to do something just to make you laugh because it's just who he is. He would literally give people his all. He was very popular in school. Like, he was more popular than I was. They used to refer to me as his little sister, but I was the big sister. But because he was so popular, that's how people viewed us. He was in baseball when he was younger, and everybody underestimated his abilities. And when my dad put him in youth baseball, he hit the ball out the park and everybody's like, oh my God, look at him. So that is like a testament to what type of person he was. Like, people always underestimated him, but he always rose to the occasion. And that's literally how he lived his life. He would get us together to have barbecues, cookouts, things like that. And it kind of helped our family get together, we miss those moments because it seems like there's a huge part of our life that's missing. So even if we do get together, it still doesn't quite seem right. So it's kind of like bittersweet, but we do have to move on with life, but the void is felt.
Eric was my uncle. To describe who he was, it's hard to put in words because he meant so much to so many people. He was a father figure, not just for me, but for his stepchildren. Whoever he was with, he treated them as if those were his kids. He always looked out for his friends and his family. He always was the person that congregated the family. So he would have events all the time. And we would always go to his softball games. He was part of the softball team at his job. And he was literally, I never seen him angry. I never seen him sad. He always had a big smile on his face. He loved music. Whenever he would come by, you knew he was coming. You could hear the music before he got there. He was a spirit, like a living spirit. That's why it's so hard to describe who he was, because it was nothing but joy when he was around. And it always like he came to the rescue right on time whenever my mom needed him or we needed him. His mother needed him. His son lived in Kentucky while he lived in Alabama. And he made it a point to always either go get him, go see him. I would ride with him sometimes to Kentucky. So he was an all-around stand-up guy. Every memory I have of him is a positive one, except for the day that he passed.
His niece Takia recalls that he was always there for people and would do anything for his family. He always made time for the ones he loved. Eric's sense of humor and positivity were contagious. He wasn't just popular because of his abilities, but because of his genuine love for others.
Hi, I'm Takia Nelams. I'm Eric's niece. So I just want to say that he was definitely like, I think the right word is a beacon in our family, where he kind of he led naturally. Like his cousins, like that were around his age, they lingered around him because he was such a leader. He was a father figure to me, and just always came through for the family whenever we needed him. He taught me how to dance. He knew how to cook. It was like he was just all around good guy, And I think I get my faithful spirit from him because, I always try to keep a smile on my face or try to keep my family happy.
Eric's sense of joy and his ability to bring people together were essential parts of who he was. He wasn't just about family gatherings. Eric worked hard to make everyone around him feel valued. Eric's mother, Annie, remembers her son as being a friendly, outgoing man. He was truly a kind person and really would go out of his way to help others. Annie recalls him being such a people person and someone who truly, truly cared.
My name is Eric Nelams, and I am the mother of Eric Nelams, who was killed September 26, 2003, in this driveway. I want to say that Eric was a very nice and intelligent young man. And most people would say that they would give you a shirt out their back. But when I say that about my son, it's really true. He helped a lot of people.
After high school, Eric joined the U.S. Army in 1990. His service took him to Germany and later to the Persian Gulf during the Gulf War. Eric's service in the Army shaped him into a disciplined, dedicated man, known for his sharpshooting skills and unwavering commitment. But even as he traveled the world, Eric always kept in touch with his childhood friend Tara Jones, and their relationship eventually turned into a lasting bond. Eric and Tara's relationship blossomed later in life, and in 2003, they decided to get married. The couple settled into a new home, blending their families. Eric had children from his previous relationships, and he quickly bonded with Tara's children. They built a life together, focused on their family and their future. Eric's children, including his son Antonio, were really the center of his world. On the morning of September 26, 2003, Eric followed his usual routine. He woke up early, prepared for his day, and left for work, while his wife and children remained asleep inside their home. His family had no idea what would unfold just outside the door. Eric walked out into the carport, a short distance from the front door of his house, to start his truck and get ready for his day. It was a typical Friday morning, until it wasn't. As Eric stepped outside to start his truck, someone was already waiting for him. At 5:30 a.m., multiple shots rang out, echoing through the air. Eric was ambushed. The shooter fired at least 3 times, striking Eric multiple times. And within seconds, he was down, lifeless on the concrete. The shooter fled the scene immediately, leaving Eric's body lying there, cold and unmoving. His wife Tara, still inside, heard the shots and rushed to gather the children, locking them in the bedroom and escaping out the window to safety. But by the time emergency responders arrived, Eric was already gone. As Tara ran to a neighbor's house to call for help, the police arrived at the scene to find Eric lying lifeless just outside his home. The investigation then began, but at first, there were more questions than answers. The authorities quickly ruled out robbery. Eric's belongings were left untouched, and there was no sign of a struggle. It left the police wondering, what was the motive for the brutal murder? Well, the motive, it seemed, was personal. But what was the reason? Police immediately began questioning Eric's family, friends, and neighbors. Everyone they had spoke to had nothing but praise for Eric. They couldn't fathom why someone would want him dead. In the early days of the investigation, law enforcement considered every possible angle, but none of them led to any concrete answers. One thing did stand out, though. The shooter had been waiting for Eric. The time of the attack, 5:30 a.m., was not random. It was a time that Eric followed every single day. He left for work early, just as he always did. This suggested that the shooter was familiar with Eric's routine, perhaps even someone close to him. Annie, especially, felt this in her gut. She firmly believed that the murder of her son had been premeditated by someone who knew Eric's habits. They timed him. They knew what time he came out to go to work. They were already there and just started shooting. Despite the pain, Eric's mother and his family were determined to get answers. They pushed for an investigation, hoping that someone would eventually come forward with a clue, a piece of the puzzle that would crack the case wide open. But unfortunately, no such breakthrough came. Phoenix City police initially struggled to make any headway. The family was devastated, not just by Eric's death, but by the lack of progress in the investigation. Kathy explains that they didn't hear anything from the police, that they kept reaching out, but they were left in the dark. It was frustrating that they didn't know where to turn. Kathy shares more about how she felt throughout the process.
I would contact them and try to get information, and they were forthcoming. Not initially, but eventually once we got in their face and they kind of saw us and felt, for us and the grief that we were going through, they did provide us with information. So I don't want to make it seem as though they didn't. They didn't handle my mom on the scene correctly because they didn't acknowledge that she was a mother. They didn't console her. They didn't say my condolences. They didn't say I will follow up with you and your family in regards to this case. None of that happened. So she still feels like she's unseen and unheard, and I can totally understand that. And because of that feeling that she has, that's what drives me. These 2 people on this podcast, my children, that's my why, because they suffered a loss just as much as I did. And last but not least, his son, he lost a father. That's what motivates me to keep going and make myself, it's like a selfless thing because of them.
Despite the lack of progress from local authorities, Kathy took matters into her own hands. She began writing letters to law enforcement, reaching out to media outlets, and contacting anyone who could help bring attention to the case. She felt like she had to do something. She couldn't just sit around and wait for the phone to ring.
So when my brother was killed, I immediately just started thinking of things that I can do, people I can reach out to try to get reward money. Like that was my biggest goal at first, because I was trying to leave everything up to the law enforcement to try to get the case off. So I wanted to bring attention to it. So I reached out to the company that he worked for. I reached out to some of his former classmates that went to the NFL or NBA, looking on the different TV shows that would focus on cold case. So at the time, America's Most Wanted was like the show for crime related cases. So I wrote to them several times. I wrote to Nancy Grace. I wrote to Cold Case in 48 Hours Dateline to see who could highlight his case and bring some attention to it. So again, none of that was fruitful. I just kept moving forward. I made a list of all law enforcement in Alabama. I wrote letters to them. I wrote letters to the Attorney General, to anybody who I can get attention from. Where the ball started moving is when my mom and I went and sat down with the Russell County DA. At the time, his name was Kenneth Davis. Ken Davis listened to my mom and I, and he assigned an investigator to oversee my brother's case in Phoenix City Police Department. But it's only was one investigator in the office, so of course he has to split his time with other cases.
As the investigation unfolded, several theories emerged. The most prevalent one was that the killer was someone who knew Eric, someone who understood his schedule and knew when he'd be alone. The calculated nature of the crime, the fact that the shooter was waiting for him at precisely the right time, led investigators to believe that this was no random act of violence. The timing of the attack suggested a level of premeditation. Another theory that emerged was that Eric's murder was a targeted hit. Some believe that the murder had been carried out by someone with experience in committing such crimes. The fact that there were no witnesses and no direct evidence to point to a suspect made this theory seem possible. Could someone have paid to have Eric killed? Was this a professional hit? Others believed the murder was tied to an embezzlement case Eric had become involved with. Eric had been in the middle of an embezzlement case with some people he knew, according to Kathy. He had gone to Atlanta to meet with them just days before his death. This connection may have been a part of the reason he was targeted.
Throughout the investigation, I knew from the beginning that there was a lingering case in regards to a federal case dealing with an embezzlement that my brother took part in, as far as cashing the checks for one of his friend's spouses. The Atlanta connection is that my brother and the company that the embezzlement took place from is headquartered here in Atlanta. And the friend's spouse worked at that company in the accounting department and accounts payable. So she set my brother up as a vendor, as a trucking company. And that's how the embezzlement started. So the Monday or Tuesday prior to his death, him and his wife made a trip to Atlanta to meet with the Cowlings. So they met with Eric and Stephanie Cowling here in Atlanta. And at the time, Stephanie gave my brother a script to say to investigators when they called, because the crime had been discovered by their auditing team. She gave him the script and asked him to take the blame for the embezzlement. But I don't know how she thought that was even feasible, being that she was the inside person. No lay person can just write checks for themselves and circumvent the system where it's not discovered for a long period of time. So fast forward to Friday, my mom gets a call at work that my brother had been shot, and she thought it was a joke, because my aunt that communicated this to her is a joker of the family. So she didn't think that she was serious. But when she arrived on the scene, of course, she discovered my brother's body laying in his driveway, and all these people are gathered around. Amongst the people that's gathered around is the people that I'm mentioning that he met with earlier that week. So there's just a lot of people that typically wouldn't be in the midst that was there on the scene, according to my mom, and it's highly suspectful. And she mentioned that there were two guys that were apprehended and in handcuffs on the ground when she arrived. However, in the police report, it doesn't mention that anybody was detained. So I found that highly suspicious as well. The federal case was tried. They called me as a witness because I was privy to the information, not the details, but just the overall premise of what was going on. The persons of interest, the couple, they were sentenced to 8 years in a federal prison. They came back home and just resumed their life as though nothing happened. So like when I would visit my mom in Columbus and see them riding up the street, it was just pissed me off so bad because I'm like, they're out and living their life and they could have potentially taken a life. And I say they because when the detective on the case, she's now deceased. When the two initial detectives on the case, it was Lieutenant Deere and Detective Mike Virgo. They told us, like, I came out and asked because there was so many rumors floating around our hometown. They were saying that the spouse was involved. They were saying her ex-spouse, her ex-husband was involved. And then these two friends. Nobody knew about the two friends because it was something that we kept within our family. So if you had no knowledge of it, you would just default to that the wife and the ex-spouse did it, which is still probable. But when I asked the detectives, did they question him? They said, yes, we don't think he did it. So they told me that Eric and Stephanie Callan were their main suspects. So
With this theory, the family's suspicions continued to grow stronger, and Kathy and her family believe that this may have been the motive behind the killing. The police, however, have never confirmed this theory. In June 2004, nearly a year after Eric's death, the case was still unsolved. The investigation had hit a wall, but because of Kathy's perseverance, then Alabama Governor Bob Riley stepped in. He announced a $5,000 reward for any information that could lead to an arrest and conviction. It was a long shot, but it was a step toward keeping the case alive.
I asked him, is there something you can do to get some reward money? And he said, yes, I can write to the state and see if we can get some reward money. So he obliged and did that. And the governor at the time was Bob Riley. And Bob Riley did make a reward proclamation for $5,000. So we were happy for that.
Unfortunately, Governor Riley's reward did little to stir up new information, and the case continued to grow cold. Despite the lack of answers, though, Eric's family has never stopped fighting for justice. Over the years, Kathy's tireless advocacy has kept the case in the public eye. In recent years, as the 20th anniversary of Eric's death approached, the family renewed their efforts. They reached out to Central Alabama Crime Stoppers and managed to get a new billboard placed in Atlanta, Georgia, which was a strategic location. Kathy says she wanted to put the billboard up in Atlanta because she believed the people involved in Eric's murder were from there. It just felt like the right place to remind people that his case is still unsolved. Though progress has been slow, Kathy and her family's relentless fight for justice continues. In 2023, the state of Alabama renewed the reward for Eric's case, raising it to $10,000, a step forward for a case that has been cold for far too long.
At the time, Columbus, Georgia, which is the neighboring city for Phoenix City, Alabama, they had a Crime Stoppers at the time. So we had a total of $6,000. So the state gave us $5,000. Crime Stoppers did $1,000. It just got to a point where working on this case really consumed me, and that's just all I could think about. And at the time, I had little kids. My kids were on the verge of being teenagers, but she wasn't quite there. So I just had to get to a point where I had to just let it go. And I literally told myself I was going to give it to God because it was taking control of my life. As a matter of fact, it really got to a point where I felt like I wanted to kill myself and be suicidal. Because I couldn't understand why would somebody take such a great person? And that's just where my mind was going. So that's the dark place that I went to. But thank God I was able to get away from that and to move forward in life. So I put all that to the rest. I would touch it every now and then when the anniversary of his death would approach. I would reach out, and if nothing came of it, I would move forward. Fast forward to the 20th year approaching. I talked to my mom and I was like, hey, you know, the 20th year is approaching. We need to do something. Again, I go into research mode. I'm on Google and just writing down different things that I can try, writing letters. Reached out to Central Alabama Crime Stoppers. We went to Montgomery. We had a press day with them. Central Alabama Crime Stoppers initiated the reward from early 2000s to be renewed, as well as add an additional $5,000 to what we potentially could have from the state again. So that brought the reward to $10,000. Since then, everything has been steadily moving forward. I think one of the first people that I talked to was Alabama Cold Case Advocacy with Mary and Carey from Alabama Cold Case Advocacy. They're the first people that we interviewed with and did the podcast. And then we talked to Dawn with Method and Madness podcast. And then after that, I met with Kendall from Season of Justice. She talked to me. We cried together. And she told me that she was going to submit my application for a grant, but it will be in the spring. So fast forward, spring comes. She said, you guys are getting this grant. We're going to put a billboard up for you. She sent me to different locations. I strategically chose the location that was closest to my brother's home because I just wanted to remind those that are coming by that, you know, his case is still unsolved and not unforgotten. So it was a joyous moment for our family because it felt like we had finally accomplished something after years of the case being stagnant and feeling like the police department wasn't listening to us. And will we give them information? It feels like they brush it off or withhold information from us. So it was like a little victory for us to see that billboard up there and to see his face on that billboard. It was just a joyous moment. And I know that sounds crazy for a murder case, but that's how it made us feel. We were happy. So it was like a little victory.
Kathy's petition for the Attorney General's office to take over the case has also gained a lot of traction, with over 1,000 signatures now in support of the request. I'll make sure to leave the link in the show notes so you can also go and sign the petition and be a part of the fight for justice for Eric.
Because the Phoenix City Police, I had been soliciting for the Attorney General to take over the case because I just had lost faith in that police department because Phoenix City is just such a small town and I just never had faith in them to solve my brother's case. So I went on Change and created a petition for the Attorney General's cold case unit to take over the case. And the police department was kind of, I'm not going to say resistant, but they kind of like patronized me and they were like, yeah, okay. They appeased me. I reached out to the person, the name that I found on LinkedIn that worked for the Attorney General's office. And I'm like, hey, so here's my brother's case here in Alabama, and I want to see if you could review it for potentially you guys taking over the case. Mind you, I had already sent letters to the Attorney General's office prior to that and didn't get any response from them. But I'm going to back up a little bit. Back in 2004, I reached out to the Attorney General for the state of Alabama at that time. His name's Troy King. And at that time, he did respond to my letters and he was like, we're sorry for your loss. You know, I'll make sure that all the resources we have is extended to this case. So they accepted it. They assigned it to Tony Castaldo as the investigator. They was monitoring the case because there was a federal component that's attached to it. Eventually, one of the people that worked at the cold case unit sent me an email. His name was J.D. Shelton. And he said that we've heard from Phoenix City that the case is solved. And I'm like, why would someone say that when it's not true? So I immediately called Phoenix City Police Department. I'm like, hey, Mr. Shelton at the AG's office is telling me that the case is solved. Did you guys solve the case and didn't notify the family? And they're like, no, that's not correct. So anyway, I tried to get it undone, reached out to the AG again. It was like, hey, your office made this mistake. How can we make this right? Long story short, the AG is not reelected or whatever it is. A new AG is in the office. So it's like starting over from square one because they can rotate the investigators as well. So I reached out to the current AG, who is Steve Marshall. He did not respond like the previous AG had. There was no correspondence or anything from multiple letters. So then that motivated me to do the change.org petition for that office. And my goal is for their office to take over the investigation because they are staffed by seasoned law enforcement officers. So they're former homicide detectives, FBI agents, Secret Service. So I figured with their vast experience that they would, you know, look at the case. And even if they don't, it would be fresh eyes on a case that's been stalled for 20 plus years. That's where I am right now. And as of yesterday, we crossed the threshold of 1,000 signatures, which I'm happy for. That was a huge milestone. So I want the AG's office still to take over the case. I would like for the numbers to continue to go up because without the numbers, that doesn't get their attention if you don't have the numbers or the following behind you. I don't have a huge following, and I'm okay with that because I feel as though the people that I do have follow me and support me, they do it religiously. Like they're like strong supporters, and I'm happy for that. So it's quality over quantity because I've still been able to get things accomplished and move forward.
To this day, the murder of Eric Nelams remains unsolved. Phoenix City Police state that they continue to investigate, and the family continues to fight for answers. While the case has gone cold, it is not forgotten.
When it approached the 20th anniversary, as I said, I stepped away for a while. I told myself I would put a notice in my calendar where I would contact him every month on the 26th, because that's the day my brother died. So every month on the 26th, I send them an email. And at first I was calling, and then something that the captain that's assigned to the case, told my mom, my daughter, and I, he recanted later. That taught me a valuable lesson. I don't want to talk to you because you can always say, oh, that's hearsay. So I always reach out to him via email so that it's in writing. So that's my routine with him. My mom and I recently had a meeting it was supposed to be with the police chief, but the police chief opted out and sent the assistant police chief. And when my mom and I asked them questions in regards to the status of the case, they're saying, we've exhausted all the leads, but the case is still active. And a lot of people that I've talked to, they was like, how can it be when it's a cold case? So we had a lot of questions, and their answer was, we can't discuss that with you. And if they knew going into the meeting that was the stance they were going to take, why waste our time? I traveled 2 hours to come to Columbus from Atlanta just to have this meeting, and just for you to tell me no comment, pretty much. So that pissed me off again. I'm okay with being the angry sister, and my mom can be the one that they have sympathy towards, because that's just what it is. So that's my role. I'm okay with that. I don't care about ruffling feathers, because what do I have to lose at this point? Like, my brother is gone, and his case is still unsolved. So on Twitter, I have specific people that I reached out. I reached out to everybody that had something to do with law enforcement, cold case, advocacy, things like that. So amongst those people was this guy named Douglas McGregor, and he's a part of this group called the IRIS, and I forgot what it stands for, but they're like a team of an investigative group. So we did talk, and he said, this is a case that my group will be interested in, and we're willing to accept the case. But the contingency is that Phoenix City Police has to give us access to the case file. So my diligent self, write a letter. I wrote it to both the DA. I wrote one to the Attorney General, and I wrote one to the captain who's assigned to my brother's case. And immediately he said, no, I'm not inviting anybody into my case. It's an active homicide investigation. So I'm like, well, what's active about it? Why? He didn't reply back, but in our meeting, what we had with the assistant police chief a few weeks ago, last month, he was like, oh, we're not going to invite non-law enforcement. Well, when I sent the letter to each of them requesting that they release the case file, either to me, my mom, or to this team. The team was not asking for the files to leave their office. They wasn't asking for the police to step out of the room or anything like that. They were willing to sign a non-disclosure agreement. But again, Phoenix City Police shut that down. That pissed me off once again, and that's my word when it comes to Phoenix City. It's pissing me off because that's what they constantly do. So these people, Douglas provided me a flyer with all their credentials on it. Like, these people that are solicited by police officers and FBI all around the United States when they have a case that they want these specialists on. So they are former homicide detective, forensics, anything that you would want to solve a case, they have it on their team. So again, they denied that. I wanted to mention that as well because we're at a standstill. And my thing is, if Phoenix City said they've exhausted all of their resources and have no new leads in regards to this case, and the case is not moving forward, and you're not giving it to the AG's office, then why not let a person come in and take a look at it? Like, what do you have to lose? And it's my understanding that a lot of times it's due to an ego trip. Like, how dare they invite somebody else in to come solve our case. Well, if that's your position, then do your job. Do your job. And that's all we expect from them is for them to do their job. If not, step to the side.
I would like to say that I wish and pray that the Phoenix City Police Department will start interviewing some of the people that was involved in this case. They have been given information, and then they said hearsay, but I know for a fact that it's not hearsay. So I need them to do their job and stop telling me that they can't make these people come in and talk to them when they're so close to the case. And some of them was involved in the shooting of my son. And they still won't do anything. And I need them to really do their job.
But the question still remains. Who killed Eric Nelams? Was it someone close to him? Someone who knew his schedule and knew exactly when to strike? The lack of evidence, the absence of witnesses, and the fact that nothing was stolen from Eric makes this case a difficult one to crack. But there's always hope that someone, somewhere, will come forward with the crucial piece of information needed to solve this case.
When he passed out, I think I was 15 or 16. I was like a freshman in high school. My mom came and picked me up from school, and we drove down to Columbus. Nobody told her what was going on at the time until we got to my granny's house. And when we found out what happened, it's just disbelief, because he wasn't a street guy. He wasn't a bad person. No known enemies. Like I said, I never seen him in a confrontation or never seen him angry. And then few days after his passing, out hearing my mom's account of what happened, the first 48 to 72 hours is probably the most crucial time trying to solve a murder, and to neglect the family or my mom's input. And she had crucial information, just spoke to kind of the incompetence of the police department. And I feel like since they've been passing the buck, it's kind of an embarrassment through her reaching out to different people that are willing to do the due diligence and request records, so on and so forth, speaks to how it may be embarrassing to them, even though this is a different administration as far as the police department is concerned. These are different people, different leaders in the police department. It's kind of a slap in the face, because even with the FBI, it feels like the money was more important than the life, when these two things were clearly connected. Whether there's a connection to his murder or not, these things are connected in some form or fashion, whether it came from the people involved in the initial crime or somebody in retaliation. Who knows? But to not investigate those things was a slap in the face. Amongst the people that would hang around him, such as his friends, his wife, they kind of fell by the wayside. And these were people that were a constant in his life, they were a constant in our life, whether he was there or not. So for him to be gone and those people disappear as well, it just raised all kind of red flags. And these are the same people that my mom mentioned to the police department. So for us to be able to piece things together and see them for what they are, or see the connections, and then the police department's investigative teams neglect to do so, it feels like a slap in the face. And we were angry for years how they handled it and how the people around my uncle were behaving. And now that anger is more focused into a positive outcome, seeking justice for my uncle. So at this point, the billboards, the constant reposting and posting about him and his case and the reward is to remind people that we haven't forgot. There's a reward out for any information, and we're seeking justice at any cost. So we'll spend the time, the money, the resources, whether the departments want to do it or not. We'll keep grinding at it until something comes out, because like I said, a lot of this is kind of obvious as far as something to look into. And we just want enough energy behind this and enough attention behind this to where it can't be ignored. You have to look into it, whether it's the police department or these investigative groups I even think she had trouble getting the autopsy report, which is ridiculous. His mom and his sister are his two closest relatives. And for them not to be able to get those documents is strange. And for his ex-wife to not want to be a part of the justice seeking is even stranger. Um, so I can't espouse any wrongdoings on anybody. I can only speak to how it feels once he's gone and how they behaved when he was here. Because like my sister said, he was a beacon, so people gravitated towards him and gravitated towards our family. And for him to be gone and the love that they had for our family in air quotations to seem like it no longer exists is it's puzzling. And like I said, it's a slap in the face for all of those things not to be looked at and investigated. It's a major void that's missing in our family. Even though he's been gone so long, he was so important that when different situations would arise after his death, I would always think, how would this be different if he was here? How would this be different if he was here? You know? And he has a son now that has a daughter, so he would have been a grandfather. And his son followed in his footsteps and joined the army as well. And it's doing very, very good. But it's even hard for him to advocate for his father. I can only imagine, the thoughts that he had, even seeing our reposting and posting of some of this stuff. So we'll speak for him, even though right now he may not be emotionally able to advocate for himself. We'll advocate for him and his father because, like I said, it's such a big void that's missing from my family, and justice is needed because he didn't deserve that at all. Nobody in our family deserved not to have him present. He deserved to live as long as God would allow. For somebody to take whatever they thought into their own hands is just not right. Especially because of the kind of person he was, and just totally unwarranted. Totally unwarranted, especially for everybody else to just move on with their lives and act like he didn't exist or act like he didn't do things for them or really, really be there for them in their time of need. So we're going to advocate for him. We're going to advocate for his son and his grandchild and my grandmother and my sister and me. And anybody that'll come after, we'll keep his name alive. We'll keep his legacy alive. Because that's the kind of person that's missing. He deserves to be celebrated. He deserves justice.
If you have any information, no matter how small it may seem, please contact Crime Stoppers of Central Alabama at 334-215-7867. You can remain anonymous. Your tip could be the one that finally brings justice to Eric Nelams and brings answers to his family. If you know something, say something. I want to personally thank Eric's family for partnering with me to bring you this episode. Please make sure to share. Share this episode so we can continue to bring awareness to Eric's case. And hopefully one day, he will get the justice he deserves. Thank you so much for joining me today for this episode of Case Uncovered, and for listening to Eric's story. Make sure to connect with me on Facebook and Instagram at Jen Rivera Investigates. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and stay safe out there. Fire Eyes Media.